So next we'll kick off the nuts and bolts section, and this is how we talk about drawing maps. The first three panelists were commissioners on the California Redistricting Commission, and then we have two other panelists after them. And so our panelists are Gil Ontai, and he's going to speak about how to form a blank page to a map. Actually, all three commissioners will talk about that subject. Gil was a 2010 California Redistricting Commissioner from the San Diego region. He is an architect and businessman who used his professional knowledge and skills in drawing district maps. Next, we'll have Andre Parvenu. And Andre is a former resident of Virginia who presently resides in Los Angeles, California, where he has served as a city planner, zoning analyst, and community outreach specialist, both for the US Census Bureau and the county's Metropolitan Transportation Authority, known as Metro. And then we will have Jeanne Raya, who served as California's 2010 commission as a registered Democrat from the city of San Gabriel / County of Los Angeles. Jeanne, Gil, and Andre traveled together in 2019, sharing their experience with redistricting reformers in Pennsylvania and New Jersey under a grant to the California Redistricting Commission from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. After the commissioners, we will have Angel Chen, and she will talk about tools for drawing maps. Angel is with the Redistricting Data Hub. She is a distributed training specialist at Haystack DNA, working on the Redistricting Data Hub project. Angel graduated from New York University with a BS in Sustainable Urban Environments and received a Master of Urban and Regional Planning from UCLA. And finally, we will have Suzanne Almeida from Common Cause, who will talk about creating the map-making process. Suzanne is a redistricting and representation counsel. She's responsible for supporting state common cause organizations in their redistricting reform and census work through legal, legislative drafting and strategy, communications, and coalition assistance. She also works on state-based and national redistricting and census litigation. Before coming to Common Cause, she worked with the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania and Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts. Welcome, panelists.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Jeanne, and I'm going to go first and talk a little bit about what the experience of being a commissioner is like, and then Andre and Gil will take up a little bit more of the aspects of actually drawing the map. As I've listened to the speakers today, and I also listened to Virginia's May 10th meeting, I really think that all of these commissions are all heading in the same direction. We have the same issues, the same concerns. And so I just wanted to, from listening to that, I wanted to point out just a few things about, when we were the first commission in California, so we really felt that our experience was building the airplane mid-flight, and I get the sense that you all probably feel the same way. So I wanted to share some of what we learned about surviving. One thing is that it's very important early on for the commissioners to get to know each other. And I know this is challenging in the pandemic because there's no personal contact. And we have the advantage of a lot of social time, which helped us to build trust and get to know each other as people. That served us very well in the tense mapping times when there were very strong differences of opinion. We also had the advantage of we really represented the diversity of California. So we had a lot of voices on the commission, a lot of ears on the commission to hear from diverse communities. The only way that diversity on the commission works is if you are actually listening and engaging with a diverse voter cohort as well. We did not have legislators on our commission, as you know, and I think that often there's a sense among non-legislator commissioners that somehow the legislators know more than they do. So I just emphasize to you, you are all citizens. There was a first time for the legislators to do this. And so it's important to have confidence that you bring skills to the process, whatever those skills might be. It's helpful to understand, each other's skills so that you can, collaborate on the mapping process. It was also very helpful to us. We broke into teams that, you think you know a lot about your state until you talk to somebody who is from another part of the state, or you realize, oh, there's a mountain range over there or a river over here that you were not fully aware of. So it's important just to be open to learning. You don't have to know everything. Nobody knows everything, including the people who've drawn maps for decades. So I just urge you to approach this with the knowledge that it's going to take more time out of the rest of your life than you may have anticipated. And you're going to feel pressed with a short timeline to get everything done. But I have to say that serving on our commission and sharing our experience in our travel with other states has been probably the most rewarding service that I've done. And I think you will also find great satisfaction making Virginia history and giving your citizens fair districts. I'm going to turn it to Andre. I believe you're up next.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Jeanne, for that introduction. And congratulations, Nancy, for your good work in Michigan. I'd like to say a few words right now about population changes and how we got started in the state of California. But first, I want to say this very quickly. I know we're short on time. Liz mentioned, yes, I am a former resident of the Commonwealth of Virginia. I lived and worked in Richmond and Roslyn up north and Newport News and downtown Norfolk. So I was raised in Lunenburg County, Virginia, which is South Central, and I integrated the school system there in 1965. So I'm especially appreciative of the work that Uric and Eric and Chris and Alex are doing. So I'm a recipient of that time period. Now, getting to the matter at hand, how did we go from a blank page to a map? Well, we actually, in actuality, we didn't really start with a blank page, a blank slate. Our process was driven by two major factors. The two top criteria that we used were, of course, equal population and the Voters' Rights Act, which during the time that we were redistricting, we had 4 counties in California that required Section 5 pre-clearances, as was mentioned before. They were Monterey, Merced, King, and Yolo. One happened to be coastal. The other 3 were more interior. One sort of Southern California, well, sort of Southern Central, one Central, and one Yolo, sort of somewhat Northern. But this definitely dictated how we got started and where we got started. Once these 4 counties were drawn, we sort of worked around them or radiated out from them, leading us to our first major criteria, which was equal population. In California, we had 711,000 people per district, congressional district at the time, and we chose to have a 1% deviation. It could have ranged from 1% to 5%. I'm not suggesting that you do that, but in California, we chose a very narrow deviation to set a standard, since we were the very first commission for the state, of course. But we were challenged with the fact that over a 10-year period, California's population had grown by 10 million, close to 10 million, from about 34 million to close to 40 million people. So our challenges in California were a matter of territory, size, volume, and time. We had 53 congressional districts, supposed to 11, 80 assembly, which are like your House delegate positions. But the tremendous volume of information we received had to be gathered, analyzed, and categorized in a very short amount of time, which happened to be nine months for us. Now, having said all that as a backdrop, what are some of the important takeaways? How can you all learn from our experience, and what are some of the similarities? The similarities is that we had very clearly defined criteria. We tried to stick to that as much as possible. Jeanne had mentioned too that we had some very robust discussions and issues along the way, but we always relied back towards the criteria that were established. And we have those criteria in common with you all: equal population and contiguity, and we made sure that we kept cities and county boundaries whole. its impact it's to the extent possible. Gil would be speaking on that, of course, compactness. What I'm really pleased about what you all are doing is that you have some very clear equal protection clauses in your amendment to make sure that there's no denial of rights to votes by any race or ethnic groups, or to give equal opportunities for your population. That's going to be a driving force in your decision. Now, shifting gears real quick with my remaining time, putting my geographer's hat on, I've noticed in looking at your last maps from the last go round that you have some very elongated north-south vertical oriented districts. Of course, your 5th district extends from the Carolina border to up to the outskirts of Washington, D.C. Of course, you have your Appalachian. Okay, great. I'll be quick. I think I left off, or maybe you heard me say something about the geographic diversity of the state and how you have similar issues in Virginia that we had in California to deal with. We have a mountainous region to the east, similar to your Piedmont or Appalachian area to your west, and we had our coastal region, of course, and our Central Valley. What I've noticed is that you in Virginia have these very elongated, sort of north-south oriented districts, extending in one case from North Carolina's boundary to up to the outskirts of DC. And of course, your famous District 3, Congressional District 3, extending from Richmond to the Tidewater area. Now dealing with compactness and trying to reduce these very long stretched out districts is going to be one of your challenges. To the extent possible, we looked at community of interest testimony to rationalize how we could not follow that pattern that we inherited before. So you'll have to figure that out, how best to approach that, to have maps that are very dissimilar to what you currently have. And how you're going to go about that is, of course, going to take a lot of discussion on your part, and involvement with the community's participation. The other thing I want to say that we have in common is that we have some degree of diversity that we had a lot of diversity actually that we had to incorporate. And one thing that we did though, and I'm not suggesting that you consider this, but in California, we worked from without to within, meaning that we looked at some of the less populated areas on the outskirts, and as we approached the inner cities, that we had to use a lot of scrutiny to make sure that we did not separate communities on the micro level after working from the macro level. So when we got into places like Los Angeles and San Francisco and San Diego, some of the more densely populated areas, we had to be very careful about not splitting for a long time traditional communities. There's a lot more that I could say, but I want to shift the baton now to my colleague Gil, who will speak more on communities of interest and how we dealt with those very intricate decision-making steps when it came to determining where the lines were drawn based on community input. So there you have it, Gil. Go right ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having us. We always enjoy having these Zoom sessions where we get to share our experiences. So hopefully what we share with you today is going to be helpful. I've been listening to the entire program since we started, so it's really an interesting Zoom session that has been put together. Very helpful information. What I wanted to share with you, the audience, is a couple of talking points, but some key issues that I think are important. Number one, I think when you start this process, and this is to the commissioners, you really have to start off with a mindset that you are a partner with the public in drawing these maps. You're not alone. You've got to really have synced in your mind that you're talking to the public across the kitchen table, and it's a true authentic engagement on what is important and what are fair maps. So that mindset is very important. And I think the 14 commissioners in California learned very quickly that we had to do that, and it really made a big difference on how the public perceived us. So that's number one. Number two is map drawing is really a complicated process, as we've been hearing from Moon and others, because you have both quantitative and qualitative data that you have to balance, and it's really an awful lot of information that you have to take in. What we did as commissioners essentially drew Venn diagrams. If you're familiar with Venn diagrams, you draw these concentric circles and you try to put or optimize the information as in neat circles, overlapping where it's possible, but trying to keep intact groups and VRA information is within each of these groups. So you quickly learn with your consultants and from public input, in your minds, think of Venn diagrams and what are the optimal grouping of this public input so that you can draw maps that are as fair as possible, but also representative of the data that comes before you. So let me give you some examples of core examples of Venn diagrams. Earlier, Chris Lamar had mentioned the tribes that we were listening to in Northern California. The tribes were important in Northern California, and this is unique to California. Maybe it is in Virginia as well. But California has one of the largest population of indigenous tribes. And in Northern California, particularly, they have suffered so much in terms of co-opting their traditional burial sites and tribal resources. So their concern was they wanted to make sure they had representation that would protect them for generations to come, or the next 10 years, that no further co-opting of their tribal burial lands and their salmon runs and bird migrations, which are all key issues, not only for the Pomo tribes and the Wintu tribes, but all of them. So it's not so much of separating them, but collectively protecting their resources. So that type of core information, you will not see that in the census tract data. And it made a huge difference with us because the Indian population in California is very large. These issues are also true with the middle of California, with the Chumash tribes, and in Southern California, the Kumeyays. So it's not particularly northern. So we quickly discovered that and became sensitized to that type of core information. But again, you will never get that information unless you seek authentic engagement with the public. So it's important to keep that mindset again. Another example is working with minority communities. So I think earlier Urich had mentioned multicultural coalitions. We came across that in the Los Angeles area here, where we have the Los Angeles region is really a minority majority area. So we have huge Latino communities and pockets of African American communities and pockets of Asian communities. So it was difficult drawing COI maps because they were all predictive of their own desire to have fair representation. Well, from our standpoint, the census data became very difficult because wherever we drew these census block lines, which is your basic units, it wouldn't have made much difference other than to these minority communities. So we actually asked them to help come up with maps, and they did. They went back, they created maps amongst themselves, Latino organizations, African American organizations, and they came forward and suggested to us, the commissioners, what they called the unity maps. And we looked at those and it made perfect sense to us, and we accepted those maps as part of our solutions. Another example is the business community. It's very important for you to get the chambers involved, your regional planning groups, because you need to protect those areas that create jobs and economic growth. You can't really get that sense unless you know where the tourism is going in your communities, what your subdivision 20-year plans are, where your enterprise zones are in your low-income census district areas, because these districts depend on federal dollars, on CBDG dollars. So you need to, the community needs to tell you where these areas are. You need to protect your university centers where emerging high techs are, and you need to protect your transportation links that bring this all together. These are qualitative as well as quantitative data, but that public engagement will help you to make more mature and sophisticated Venn diagrams that will be trusted by the community, trusted by your own commissioners, and ultimately trusted by the public and even the courts, if you should ever reach that point. There is no such thing as perfect maps.
Yeah.
And I want you guys to realize that. You cannot create perfect maps. We had a phrase in our own commission that we have to share the pain. And that is true. But you have to do it in such a way that is as fair as possible, that everybody has had a chance to participate in that process. So, you know, to sum it up, I think we had 3 pillars in all of the work that we've done, and I think you have all of these as well. One is authentic engagement, virtual transparency, and you need to create mutual trust.
Thank you all 3. Next we have Angel.
Let me share my slides. So yeah, hi everyone. As introduced earlier, my name is Angel, and I will be providing a very basic overview of the mapping tools available. And so again, if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to leave them in the chat. And so just very quickly, I'm just going to go over the organization I'm a part of and what we do and how we get involved with mapping tools especially. So if you have already heard of the Redistricting Data Hub, great. If not, that's totally fine. That's what I'm here for. But at the Redistricting Data Hub, we do want to see local groups and communities more involved in redistricting. And so our goal is really to support I would say, more inclusive and fair maps drawn through a transparent redistricting process, ultimately by empowering communities to participate. And so as one of the panelists mentioned earlier, there is a really big education gap when it comes to redistricting, the process, and who it caters to. So in order to close this gap, we are making all of the key data, tools, and knowledge publicly accessible on our website. So that's just a little spiel about us. Moving forward to the mapping tools and any notable features. So I am here to talk about mapping tools as best as I can within 15 minutes. Maybe I will do really well within that time frame, but I do want to recognize that there have been so many new tools created since the previous redistricting cycle. All of them have their unique features and purposes. A lot of them do overlap in terms of what they do cover, but it would just make it almost impossible to cover them all in depth within this session. And so at the RDH, we have also done our fair share, researching and surveying all the tools available. So afterwards, if you are interested in a certain tool or maybe these tools are interesting, but you want to know about the other ones out there, I can point you to where we've compiled all of this information on our website. So our first tool up is Representable, and I'm sure you've all heard this mentioned throughout the conference today, but Representable is a really great tool for users who just want to create a community of interest in their state. And then on the other side of that, it's really great for organizations who are trying to collect testimonies, like written information about what makes, submissions a community of interest, and, really collect them all in one place and keep it cohesive. And so just showing you what the feature is, the user basically first selects their state. And so I've selected Virginia, which then takes them to a page detailing the specific community of interest requirements for that state, if there are any. Sometimes there aren't any, and so there's just, a brief definition of the community of interest, and they can move forward from that. But here you can see there are drop downs. I didn't click on any of them, but it does discuss in depth how redistricting works in Virginia in terms of the process, who oversees it, and as well as Virginia's redistricting criteria. And so that's one aspect prior to the actual map drawing. And then moving from there, it takes folks to a page that directly asks them, what unites your community of interest? So prior to drawing the map, the user has to fill out at least one of these. There's no right or wrong answer, as you can see, but it ranges from community activities to economic or environmental interests, all the way to community needs and concerns. And there are examples provided just in case, the user is a bit unsure of, what might really go in these boxes. And so this, in a sense, acts as a testimony, and it pinpoints it helps the user pinpoint the potential factors that contribute to the COI, and ultimately gives them an idea of what a definition of a COI is, if that's our community of interest is, if that's something they're not familiar with, and really guide them through a process of how they want to represent that. And so Representable is really great in that they've taken extra steps to make sure it is accessible. It's currently available, I believe, in Spanish and Arabic, and I think Mandarin is also in the works. And folks can also access this on their phone too. And so a computer is not necessary to draw and submit maps. And then just showing you, this is actually, I was able to do an exercise a few weeks ago with some students at the University of Richmond. And so once you submit all the maps, you can, they all kind of get compiled into one place. So in the middle, I hope you can see my mouse, but like where all the darker green is, that's kind of where all the maps tended to overlap, and so it created this darker green color. And then once you can view all those in one place, there is something called data layers. And so you can toggle these data layers, turning them on and seeing just how the congressional districts or state senate districts or state house districts interact with your community, whether it's around it, which district it's in, or if it cuts through. So in this case, some of the students actually found out, and this was a really neat example, that the congressional districts cut through, and also the state senate and state house districts, which aren't seen here, they actually cut through the University of Richmond campus. And so they were able to figure out that that's, partially the reason why students who lived at the southern end of the campus went to a different polling place, and they discussed, how that might impact voters and, just making voting more accessible for folks. And then moving on to Day's Redistricting App, or DRA 2020. This is also a really, really neat app. It's slightly more sophisticated tool since it's not just for community of interest. So this tool is designed to create congressional or state legislative districts. And so a helpful feature is that when you click on your state, it actually provides current maps and notable maps. So that's something you can reference, and folks can actually publish their maps and have it publicly available as long as you have an account to view them. And so that's something that is what makes this feature really neat, is like they connect you to the resources for each state. And so as you can see over here in this little bar, it includes district statistics. So you can here see, these are actually the current Virginia 2020 congressional maps. You can see the population for all of them, the deviation from the target population, as well as here you can see District 1, which is the purple one over, I hope it's this one. This one actually shows you all the population in terms of their race, and also the citizen voting age population for 2019, and also the partisan composite. So there are a lot of statistics included in this, and they also have an analytics page where you can compare different maps. And I will just move forward to, they have actually recently included a new feature that allows you to draw communities of interest. And so when you create the map, it takes you to this page that just says you can click the plus new community. Plus map would be the district map, but plus community is community of interest. You can include a brief description and also choose what data that you want to reference when you draw these boundaries. And why I'm pointing this out is because this actually links to their district plan drawing feature. So when you draw a congressional or state legislative map, you can actually include the previous communities of interest you've drawn, so that when you're drawing these district lines, you can view your community and make sure you're not cutting through them or misrepresenting them in certain ways. And so here you can see again, I actually wanted to point out, this is actually the GeoJSON that I've downloaded from my previous exercise with the students at University of Richmond. A lot of these tools do, they do communicate with one another. So depending on the file types that are available for exporting and importing, you can include that. You can download one file from, let's say, Representable. In this case, I downloaded the GeoJSON, and I was actually able to down here, custom overlay, include it into this software. And so I know some folks are drawing at the municipal levels or local levels. So here you can see the overlays. They only have district lines, precinct lines, county lines, and city lines. If there are some other lines that you have a shapefile for or GeoJSON for that you would like to be included so that you can draw around those lines instead, that's something you can include as a layer in the custom overlays. So that's something that's a really neat feature about this. And then moving forward, we also have Districtor. And so this is a tool created by MGGG. And so for Virginia, what's currently available is the congressional districts, the state Senate districts, and the House of Delegates districts. And then in terms of drawing the community, it's also just available statewide. They do have a cities option, and I'm not completely familiar with Virginia. I believe the cities option is really only available for Virginia Beach. Not entirely sure where that is. I'm sure you folks might know, but they are really responsive. So if you wanted to reach out to them and let them know, hey, I wanted this area included and for these districts to be drawn, that's something you can reach out to them about and see if that's something they'd be willing to include as part of this, the interface for your state. And moving forward, this is also their interface for when you create a community of interest maps. As you can see, all of these, the tools I've talked about so far, it lets you describe your community, which is a really neat feature. And as Manduchan mentioned earlier, there are resources on this website that talk about how to collect community maps, as well as sample questions to ask folks when trying to get their community of interest from them. So that's something that's available as well. And then last but not least, here you can see my awful attempt at drawing Districtor, and you can see one of the really neat features is you can also save this plan and then tag it. And so you can actually work with MGGG to set up an event code for your organization. And so when you have the event code, you can tag your maps with it. And so once you click the save button, you can share it and then include the event tag here and as well as the name. And so all of these maps that are tagged with the event code are viewable to the dashboard for the event organizers. So if you're trying to collect community of interest maps for a specific reason, this is something you can use as well. And another tool that I wanted to talk about is District Builder. I usually do mention that this tool is not available for every single state, but it is available for Virginia. So for Virginia folks, this is something you can also use. Very similar to the other tools in terms of features. They have the standard deviation in terms of what the target population is. It shows you the breakdown by race, as well as it shows you the compactness. And so it also offers in counties, block groups, and blocks. And then last but not least, we have Maptitude for redistricting online. I do really have to cover this because it is such a widely used tool, and it is redistricting software that is suited for more sophisticated users, but they have, they they do generally cater to governments or organizations that want to provide members of the general public with a means to draw and also report redistricting plans. So if you get something, I believe it's called the public edition, you can actually allow folks to log on and create redistricting plans. And the system administrator can put a restriction on the number of districts that are drawn, the geographic level that it's drawn on, and it has way more really complicated advanced tools and metrics that go along with it. And so I'm not going to cover those, but that is something that's also available. And so I wanted to actually take you to our website really quickly. So this is our website, Redistricting Data Hub, and then we have this Engage button. When you click the Engage, we have something called Choose Your Own Mapping Tool that we recently came up with. And so this is really for folks who are undecided and don't know what tool is best for you. And so we've taken the time to look at every single tool that we know of. So maybe not all the tools out there, but you can see DRA is on here. Esri is also on here, and District Builder. A lot of them I just mentioned, a lot of them I also didn't mention. But we've taken, we've taken feedback from folks to see what are the features that folks are most interested in. A big one, of course, is cost and purpose, whether it's used to draw district maps or community of interest maps, all the way to, what data is available, what states are covered. Obviously, you can't be drawing the states if they don't offer it, but we do include that, and exportable map formats. And so this is really just trying to show you what tools can be used in conjunction with other tools. And so if you see that you can import a certain format and some other tool can export the same format, that might be something that can go together. And so we include information about their plan metrics. And so as you can see from the previous tools, all of them do include equal population and contiguity and compactness as very basic ones, but as commissioners do have to figure out is one thing you might have to figure out is what compactness measures are you interested in using or standardizing for your process, because whether you're using REOC or convex hull, and I realize these names might not mean anything, but they do differ in their measurements, and so that might cause a bit of confusion when looking at different when you're using different mapping software and trying to compare the compactness measures that way. So this is just something we've created if you're interested in looking and reviewing more about different tools out there before you decide on a choice. But that is all that is out there. And one last thing that I want to mention is that we do have, I know folks were talking about the delayed census data, and we do of course know that the census legacy files will be released mid to late August. We're hoping for August 15th. And these are the untabulated summary files. They're releasing that, saying that they want states to have the opportunity to use an outside vendor to process these formats to use if they don't. And so we are actually processing the legacy files nationwide and releasing those publicly for folks to use in case that is something that you are all interested in. But that's that. That's all for the mapping tools. Those are the major mapping tools that are free and mostly open source. And if you have any questions at all, I will be happy to take them, or please feel free to email me directly at angel@redistrictingdatahub.org, or more general data questions, mapping questions, info@redistrictingdatahub.org.
Thank you, Angel. I have not seen some of how you put all of those choices together, and so that I think that's very interesting and helpful. Next, we have Suzanne, and reminding everyone to please put your questions into the chat, and we will bring everybody back at the end of the panel.
Thanks so much, Deb. And I have to say, Angel and then the California commissioners are always an incredibly difficult act to follow. And I want to thank particularly One Virginia 2021 and the League of Women Voters of Virginia for really taking the time to put together kind of all of this information. I think it's been a really great day. Before we continue to dig in, I want to be really clear that today is just a taste of the information that commissioners, local map makers, community members are going to need to ensure a successful process in Virginia. Y'all know that, but I wanted to say it anyway, just to make sure we're all on the same page. We know we have examples from other states, but we also know that each state is unique and each state brings with it its own challenges, its own culture, its own priorities. And so, what may work in another state may not work in Virginia. And I want to be really cognizant that these recommendations are hopefully general enough that folks in Virginia can take them and run with them and, make them work for you. So regardless of kind of the specifics of a state, there are three things that I want to kind of highlight before we get into some specific recommendations about creating a map making process. One is that it is incredibly important to ask for help, for feedback, for input, just like you're doing today, from experts, stakeholders, community members. Gathering information is really kind of the cornerstone of the work that you as commissioners will do, as local map makers will do. And it will take all of us working together to get to a good outcome. The second is to really urge you all to commit to transparency, right? I know that there are specific transparency requirements in statute, but even going above and beyond that where possible, because we know that the more open and accessible the process is, which is absolutely essential, but also things like issuing RFPs for data experts, internal decision-making about how to weigh conflicting COI testimony, or like Angel was referencing, the different measures of compactness for a specific district, right? So just making sure that all of that information is out there and available for the public and experts to weigh in and give you feedback. And then the third, and I feel like I am just cribbing from what Jeanne said earlier, understand that you will make mistakes, right? This is a unique process. It's the first time you all are going through this. You are very much building the plane as you are flying it. And as that is happening, it's going to be iterative. It is not going to be easy. And it is likely that you all will face significant amounts of criticism. As that is happening, I hope you all feel good about the work you do and know that you have behind you advocates, individuals, stakeholders who want this to be a success. So how do we create a map making process within the framework of these three understandings? So just to be really clear, I'm not going to talk about kind of the legal requirements. You heard all about that earlier in the VRA presentation, as well as kind of the transparency and community input presentation. And so I want to talk about some of the more nitty-gritty pieces that y'all may want to continue or consider as you're looking at this. So first of all, as we're asking for feedback, right? So thinking about having set times for public comment so people can know in advance that they are going to have an opportunity to comment. Not limiting public comment on agenda items, just the amount of time in the agenda, right? Allowing the public to kind of expand out of that. Of course, that comes with the understanding that we are all human and we spend all of our lives on Zoom, it feels like some days. But I think as much as possible, allowing kind of that space for people to have input, not just kind of on the specific things, before them, but also on other parts of the agenda as well. Thinking about encouraging the commissioners themselves to engage with the people presenting testimony or feedback, right? We know, and I think Gil said this really well, that this is a dialogue, this is a partnership. And so the more you all as commissioners, as line drawers, or as advocates, whoever is on the phone, can approach this process as a partnership, really with give and take, with asking more detailed questions, with grabbing that information, I think is going to end up with a stronger process. And again, goes back to that building public trust because you are being transparent. I think, in the time of COVID, right, we are, and I think this webinar is a really great example, one of the challenges we all have is trying to see if the public is actually engaged. If you're sitting in a room full of folks who are waiting to testify, you can read body language, you can read expressions. So think about ways to kind of incorporate similar things on Zoom. So maybe rather than doing all of your meetings in a webinar function, maybe you do kind of a more broad Zoom meeting, a town hall function with additional tech support to make sure folks are muted and kind of moving through the process. Think about how to respond and maybe think about as as your process moves along, right? As you have, I know you've started having hearings with public testimony, as that moves, what is working, what is not working? Perhaps ask the public for feedback on that, because we know fundamentally the big thing underneath this is making sure that folks feel engaged in the process. So the next piece, just some additional stuff on transparency, right? So posting your agendas early. I know that the commission has been doing this. I think in addition to that, thinking about the user accessibility of your website, making a Twitter account, social media account, making sure that you're posting any handouts and written public comments ahead of meetings. Again, I know y'all have been doing this, but it's good to highlight. And then thinking about kind of at the beginning of the meeting, mapping out the workflow, the plans for the meeting, so folks who are listening in can have an understanding of where people are going. The next thing I want to talk about is the importance of thinking really in depth in the very, very high weeds about your timelines and your processes, right? So thinking about what are the phases of the work, what are the nitty gritty tasks that are going to take place in each of those phases, right? And then what are the timelines for each of those tasks? We know that we are living in a world where things happen, life happens, timelines get pushed back, but I think looking at that process from start to finish, what do you need to do to be successful in each area, right? So for example, we heard earlier about needing to do a racially polarized voting analysis in order to ensure compliance with the Voting Rights Act, right? So that would require hiring an expert, looking at the data. Is there a need for public comment? How are you processing that data? And so kind of all of those pieces, mapping them out one by one, providing that ideally as an open working document that the public can view, is someplace that, we can really, again, feed back into this partnership. Think about this kind of as all of the phases, right? So the phases that kind of the way that I would set them out is commission orientation and operationalization. And that's really the phase that I think you are primarily in right now, right? You all are setting up your internal processes. I know you set up work groups. I know you're kind of moving from the who are we and how are we doing this into the actual work. Then there's a public education process. There's collecting communities of input data. Is the data management work that goes both to not just waiting for that census data, but also what we heard earlier today about the prison gerrymandering reform from Alex, conducting those Voting Rights Act analyses, finally into the map drawing, and finally into the litigation. So, the big thing that I'm talking about here is kind of that it's an ongoing process. There are many, many steps, and being prepared to think through those steps really at a granular level, I think will benefit the commission and map makers and the public as we move forward. I want to also kind of highlight one of those sections a little bit more. I work for Common Cause. Our big push is to make sure that anyone can get involved in redistricting. My boss, Kathy Fung, often describes the redistricting ladder of engagement as missing like the first 3 steps. And I think that's really right? We expect people to just kind of come in and understand how not just redistricting affects them, but also how to tell their story. And so a lot of the work that advocates are doing, but I would also encourage the commission to really invest in, is public education about getting to that information really in specific that we heard Nancy talk about, right? So and I think Moon spoke to this as well, right? So like, what is your community? What does it look like? What do you care about? Where is it located? And understanding as a commission how to partner with community organizations, how to find those organizations like Nancy was talking about, who have been traditionally left out of the process, how to ensure that those organizations are getting the resources that they need. So maybe that is asking local nonprofits to work with you. Maybe that is providing some resources to the public at large, right? that can kind of ramp up that level of engagement, because I think that that is foundational to what we're trying to do. And the more public input, the better this is going to go in general. And then finally, I think that the thing that and this is the fuzziest of the points, is to have a decision-making process, right? So think carefully early on about how you all are going to make decisions, knowing that decisions are going to get more and more contentious as time goes on, and knowing that, I think Gil said this, right? There's no perfect map. Not everyone is going to be happy. There is going to be conflict, but how are you going to create those decisions? What do you as a commission or you as a local map maker hold as your values that you are prioritizing? How are you thinking about things that are coming into conflict? How are you working through that? What is going to be open to the public, right? Are all of your deliberations open to the public? I would suggest and recommend that they should be, even if you're not allowing the public to comment in live time as you are discussing things as a commission. So, honestly, it's about kind of thinking about the universe of things that would need to happen to get from point A to point Z. And there's a lot of them. And I really want to acknowledge at the end of our day today that this is a lot. It is a big process. You all have taken on an enormous amount of work, and that it really must be a partnership. It must be transparent. It must have flexibility to learn as we go and change course and learn from what didn't work and learn from what did work in order to ultimately get to fair and representative maps for Virginians. And with that, I will open it up for questions and toss it back to Deb.
Thanks so much, Suzanne. So we do have several questions. And Jeanne, even though you answered this in the chat, I wonder if you would be willing to verbally speak to it. And the question is, how did commissioners manage the public hearing process?
Yeah, we had so many people turn up for our public hearings. We had 34 public hearings and then a lot of other just our regular business meetings that were fully open to the public. But in the hearings where we took testimony, we learned early on that we had to limit the time for each speaker because there were so many people lined up hours in advance. They had to take a number, and there were occasions where we worked until midnight and still did not accommodate everyone who wanted to speak. A minute ago, I'm not sure who was saying about engaging the give and take, maybe it was Suzanne, with people testifying, and that adds a lot more time to that. So we pretty much made a decision. We're just going to let people keep throwing information at us, and we're not going to try to elicit more unless it was something really unusual. And when we actually got to the mapping process, we still had public input in real time. So we were still taking input from the public, either sometimes it was people testifying at a meeting or we were sitting there working on maps, and then you're getting all kinds of messages through your email, kind of offering suggestions so that there was a constant moving around of lines, pushing the balloon one way or another to see if some of those suggestions would work. If I could too, there was a question, I don't know, maybe you want to ask it, Deb, to someone else, but there was a question about the legitimacy of COI testimony. How do you judge that? And I just wanted to comment that at our public meetings, we had a lot of organized groups who, well, let's just say they had agendas that were not necessarily representative of the communities they purported to represent, but had perhaps political concerns behind their testimony. And so I think we recognized early on, the advantage of our commissioners, and I think the same is true of everything I've seen of your commissioners, is that you have people with life experience, business experience, whatever, it's like you're not easily taken in. I think even for a lot of us, it's just even the experience of being a parent, you know, when you're being lied to or someone's tried to hoodwink you. And so that was a really important lesson we learned about public testimony, particularly with regard to communities of interest, is that people have to present a compelling case, and you have to think it through. This is where commissioner diversity comes in, because you know everybody has a different view of how different communities, you know, is this for real? Is this what you know about this particular area or this kind of community? So I guess the word legitimacy, to me, because COI testimony is so important, I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as legitimate or not, but just that it needs to be thorough. And you'll find that issues for example, the Latino community in Los Angeles might not be the same ones for the Latino community in the Central Valley. So you can't just sort of say, well, here's what Latinos worry about. We all breathe air, so whether you live in Brentwood or Long Beach, you know, we're all kind of getting some of that same polluted air, so we share some of those interests across our communities.
Thanks, Jeanne. I'll read it's a bit of a long question, and so I'll go ahead and read the one that Jeanne just addressed in case the other commissioners would like to add to what she said. But the question is, would you say COI is more quote unquote legitimate if its characteristics make it unique, or is it better if its characteristics are easily found in other districts? Or maybe a COI's legitimacy or lack thereof is irrelevant. So I don't know if any of the other commissioners wanted to add to what Jeanne said about it. Okay, we will go. Oh, Gil, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so I added a comment there. These are really qualitative questions or issues. So the commissioners that are trying to make a decision on those issues really have to listen carefully to what each COI group is presenting. You really have to be very, very cognizant of the arguments being made to make a balanced and fair decision. So, if to the question, it's a qualitative question, and these issues are going to come down to making a judgment. So the arguments have to be sound, they have to be valid, and the commissioners that have to make a decision will make those decisions that are legitimate, that are quality decisions that uniquely represent that group. So again, it's a qualitative issue, and it's a judgment issue, and you would hope that the maturity and the judgment of the commissioners will be right.
And Gil, this question may be for you as well, although anyone can respond to it, but have we asked for transparency to the detriment of team building and community connection?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
We've required our commissioners to do everything in the open, and you talked about needing to get to know each other and not discuss redistricting. But I think that our commissioners feel very cautious about meeting the letter of the law. And so how do they do that and yet still do the community building that you referred to?
Okay, yeah. So Jeanne, why don't you give a shot at that first?
Okay, yeah, actually, I posted a brief thing in the chat about this. Yeah, we were lucky that we had time for socializing. We have, and I know because of COVID that this is a challenge for Virginia, and it's definitely been a challenge for California's 2020 Commission. I think we can see that. So I'm not sure that I would say that means you find a way around, or somehow that because you're not together, you still have to be so mindful. I don't think there is any value that we would say is stronger. I think Gil, you would agree, than transparency of the process. That's really what has driven redistricting reform, is the idea that these are not backroom deals. This is in the eye of the public and to engage the public. So I think having that process, even if right now your commissioners can't get together, they're going to be in the public eye, and they're going to have to behave like they're a team and collaborating and respectfully listening to each other and to the public, because the public is going to see that, and they're going to judge the process based on how the commissioners behave. And as I said earlier, we had some tough meetings. Like, let's be honest, there were some tough meetings, but I don't think we ever lost that atmosphere of respect, and maybe sometimes just saying, okay, we need to take a step back, let's go outside and get a breath of air. But it's because we knew each other. And I think your commissioners can do that. They can get to know each other, but there is no, I don't think you can sacrifice transparency at all.
Agree, totally agree. Nothing else to add.
And I'll just share this, even though there were times where there were differences among ourselves, we didn't carry that over to later meetings. We didn't hold grudges. We didn't just, harbor on our differences and take it personally. Even though we differed in terms of our political orientations, in terms of Republican and Democrat and Independent, I think we all ended up at the end of the day going home, and the next day was a new day. We didn't carry a lot of lingering emotional baggage with us into the next issue, the next agenda item, or the next matter. To the most part, I can say that's how we function together.
Mm-hmm.
And from my personal perspective, I was concerned that I made a commitment that I am going to be on this 14-member commission, and I'm going to try to do my best to draw fair maps for all of California. And that was paramount in my mind throughout all of the navigation process. So the elements that Jeanne and Andre talked about, these were the links that helped us all make that decision collectively. What is best for California?
I would just mention, we have had some conversations. Some commissioners have spoken publicly to the 2020 commission. We've, mostly have, all agreed that our time is over. We need to step back, but we also think that we can be a resource. And I think viewers might want to look at the LA Times today, which has an article about meetings that the 2020 commission has held that are of some concern regarding transparency. And I think it just illustrates how easy it is to have a misstep with respect to transparency.
Yes, that's an excellent point, Jeanne. Another thing is we try not to section ourselves off into subgroups where we formed alliances among each other in terms of subgroups. And we try to avoid to alienate others and have little cliques, more or less. That would lend itself to the Bagley-Keene Act was very helpful in keeping us on point with that. But it's very easy in human nature to form alliances with people that you're most familiar with. So we were very cognizant of that at all times, and we tried to make sure that our subgroupings and conversations included others who may have had diverse opinions about certain matters. But we knew that, as Gil said, that our ultimate goal together, the 14 of us together, was to do what's fair and what was right for the state. So we were careful not to form many alliances, to so to speak. And I think that worked well even to the end. Even though some of that happens, and we had some strange, unusual alliances. We had alliances where we had a Republican with a very close to, and we have one here, right here with Jeanne. One of his best buddies was a Democrat from Ventura County. We had another unusual alliance where we had a mature, I'll say, a Republican from the coast that was buddies with one of our commissioners who was a young Asian, who is a young Asian entrepreneur from San Francisco who's a Democrat. So there was the chemistry sort of happened. It wasn't planned, but it sort of happened. And I think that dealt with a lot with us having mutual respect for each other, coming into the commission initially, knowing that we were bonded with that one single goal in mind, and that's to complete 177 maps in 9 months. So we were moved by that sense of accomplishment.
The person who had asked about legitimacy of the COIs has added a clarification, and he wanted to know, is it better for the characteristics of a given COI, and I'm sorry it just moved, is it better for the characteristics of is it better for the characteristics of a given COI to be unique in a given district, or if it makes a difference if the characteristics are found in other districts?
Yeah, and I just accidentally answered only Liz on that, but my opinion is that it doesn't matter. More often than not, I think shared interests are shared across communities, at least certainly here in a lot of California. You know, you just cross the street and you're in another town or city. So I don't think that that's really a concern, whether they are shared or found in multiple places or not. You know, that's really the point of the COI testimony, is to identify those individual areas that are distinct in some very important way from their neighbors. I hope that helps, not just making it worse.
So I have a new question, and that is, does California have planning district commissions? And if so, were they involved?
Yes, I can answer that for the city of Los Angeles. We have 99 neighborhood councils in the city of Los Angeles. And I sort of alluded to this earlier, but I think in the case of Los Angeles, and this is my opinion and not necessarily the opinion of my colleagues, that I think we may have been better off if we had started working with the urban areas first to keep the distinct communities intact, as opposed to working outwards towards the city and then having certain differences when it comes to splitting communities. It happened in San Francisco in the Mission District. The Tenderloin District, as we all know, is a very unique and distinct community. It happened in Los Angeles also in certain communities, and Gil can attest that it happened in San Diego as well, where we had to unfortunately split some very strong traditional communities, not by choice, but by the fact that we had to draw the line somewhere. And by the time that we worked, it's very easy to have complete zero deviation counties and districts in the outskirts, where you're dealing with desert areas and cacti and coyotes and whatever, you know, and then making those districts perfect. But as you move inward, that's where the challenges lie. And we found ourselves in that situation of having to make some real hard decisions about where to draw the line. And we did end up, unfortunately, splitting some of the jurisdictions that are part of the city charter in the case of Los Angeles. it was a public process to determine what these neighborhoods were. It was a 10-year process even before we came on board to establish these very distinct and intact neighborhoods. And we happened to, unfortunately, out of the 99, split quite a few of them, more than we would have wanted to.
Andre,
And
I just,
yes.
if I could add one thing, it's that to be clear that other commissions, local commissions and such, were not involved in the mapping that we did. Our maps were strictly drawn by our commission. Certainly we,
Right.
you know, that was information available to us, but they were not, no other commissions were involved in mapping.
That is right. Thank you for that clarification, Jeanne. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you both for that. Did all of the commissioners attend all of the meetings?
Yes. I mean, obviously there were absences occasionally, you know, everybody was living another life. So we, you know, had 2 full lives. But with respect to our road trips where we conducted public hearings and our public hearings getting testimony, we made a decision that all 14 commissioners would go on the road, which was really a logistical challenge for our staff. But it made a big difference in showing the people of California, everybody that was on the commission.
Thank you. How were the commissioners chosen for California?
Who wants to take it? You know, to avoid it being a really long answer, I would just say that it was a very long process of application, screening for conflicts, then essays that had to be written, and then an oral interview. Our particular pool was 30-some thousand people, down to ultimately a lottery choice, a bingo ball that chose all of us in groups of the subgroups. And if you're really interested in knowing more detail, I would say go to our old website for our 2010 commission. And I think yesterday I was listening to the speaker, what was his name, Brooks, saying that he sat through some really painful meetings. And I would say the same thing about the selection process, which was also entirely transparent.
I might add to that as well, that the selection process essentially was a merit process. So commissioners were requested, as Jeanne said, 30 down to 6,000 had to submit 4 or 5 essays that explained simply, you know, what made you qualified to be a commissioner. So it really was based on a merit system, to make it to describe it.
Thank you. There's another question for you. I'm wondering if large communities of interest actually submit maps. For example, Virginia's coal fields or other geological features like a gas field or an aquifer.
Yes, yes, we had submissions from major entities. We had some submittals from, for example, water districts and the Coastal Commission, and some of the, I believe they were agricultural advocates in the Central Valley, for example. There were a number of interest groups that submitted. In Napa Valley, for example, wine country, we received a great deal of testimony, COI testimony from that region, because they had shared interest in Sonoma and Napa Valley, for example. And so yes, we did receive large-scale regional type maps from certain entities and organizations along the way. And we took that into consideration, of course. That was a major help to us to actually have those huge scale maps presented to us along the way. Yeah.
Let me add to that too. Andre is correct. It was really important for us to hear these regional suggestions that covered environmental issues, watershed areas, environmentally sensitive waterways, estuaries. These are large areas that we really had to take into consideration. On the border areas of San Diego and Tijuana, we really needed to know how all of that region worked in terms of creating jobs and transportation. So large issues like that were fundamental in our decision-making process.
Thank you. And one final question. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have something to add, Andre?
I did say that. And looking at Virginia, I can imagine that you have regional concerns too from the Chesapeake Bay regions with the fishermen and women in the Appalachian region and Piedmont area. So you will encounter that. And those maps will really mean a lot to you all in terms of how exactly where precisely to draw the lines for those concerned communities. Yes.
Thank you. And one final question. How has the process changed since the first commission met in California?
The selection process was exactly the same for the second commission, and they're subject to all the same rules and standards that we were. Obviously, COVID is what really has, thrown the monkey wrench into it.
It's written into the law. The Prop 11 really spelled it out, and it's a constitutional process.
Hey, it sounds like we have gotten through all of the questions in the chat and all of the questions in the Q&A box. I just want to thank you all again for being here with us, all of our panelists, all of our speakers, and for sharing your wisdom and your experience and your best practices with our fledgling reformed process. I think we have so much to learn from all of you who are ahead of us in this process. And I just really, really appreciate your time today. For the attendees and folks who had to either miss this or miss part of it, we will be sending recordings out. We'll be sending follow-ups with links to the slides presented today and all of the external links referenced by our speakers. Andre, you have your hand up. I don't want to cut you off before we lose you.
Before we close, I just wanted to say this, that I really want to thank you guys for moving forward with this, and especially on One Virginia 2021 for your toolkit. Your community redistricting toolkit is an awesome piece of work. One of the most rewarding parts of my experience being a commissioner is the educational process, and how the people of California, I could say now, are probably some of the most educated people about what gerrymandering and gentrification, well, not gentrification, but redistricting is all about. And that wasn't the case before we started. And I see that happening in Virginia as well. So it's a movement, it's a movement in terms of democratic reform that I think is going to be very, very important nationwide. So I applaud you all for taking a major step forward in this direction, and I can only wish you all the very best.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And we're where we are on the shoulders of lots of other people who've worked on this for a long time. And again, I want to thank the League for partnering with us on this event. I want to thank everyone who spoke, everyone who attended, and we will be following up shortly with further information. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
Bye.
Everyone.
Okay, thank you.